Welcome to University Drive, your pathway to the transformational work of University of the Bahamas. Our goal is to build a better Bahamas by shaping tomorrow's leaders today, finding solutions to challenges, and forging new opportunities for growth. University Drive, where faculty, staff, students, and alumni travel the road of progress together with you.
Since March 2020, dining tables, bedrooms, the living room, or a space created and dedicated at home for learning have become the classroom that many of our students have become accustomed to. Many children and parents struggled to adjust to this new mode of learning, where students saw their teacher and classmates via a screen using platforms like Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, or Zoom. I'm your host, Nikki Bo, and welcome to University Drive. The COVID-19 pandemic thrust us all in an unexpected virtual or remote learning environment, and for many, this was uncharted territory. At first, very daunting and challenging in so many aspects, but it also provided an opportunity for education and technology to intersect at the crossroad of the great digital and technology revolution. It was advantageous for some, and there were students who thrived with the new modality of teaching and learning. But on the other hand, it was paralyzing for others who simply found the lack of human interaction and the barrier created by the computer screen a virtual nightmare, all pun intended. At the onset of the pandemic, schools were completely virtual and then progressed to hybrid models, and some still remain completely virtual. Today's show, which marks the start of Season 8 of University Drive, will delve into the impact of the digital revolution on learning. And I think it is most fitting as we've all had to adapt and shift in this new era of technology dependence. My guests today are Dr. Antoinette Pinder-Darling, who currently serves as the Deputy Librarian at UB and whose PhD research was on educational technology with a focus on virtual learning and leadership, as well as two students from her Computing Concepts and Applications course, Shaquilla Carey and Jamaro Thompson. Ladies and gents, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be on today's show, and welcome to University Drive.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
A pleasure to be here.
Dr. Darling, I'd like to start with you. Tell us a little bit about your PhD and why you chose educational technology with a focus on virtual learning and leadership.
I chose educational technology because I started with technology in my library studies back in 1998, and I realized that technology was not going anywhere. And I recognized that the Bahamas was in a very peculiar situation in which we were connected as islands. And the only thing that could really truly cement us all together was technology and virtual technology. And so I was very passionate about education, but reaching every corner of the nation. And so therefore I studied educational technology because I wanted to reach every student, because I felt that students should have a right to education, but where they live should not be a disadvantage for them. And because I knew that educators around the world, whether they lived in rural or urban areas, increasingly they were looking at how to reach the student even if they were at a distance. And that shaped why I studied education technology.
Well, okay, you said something that has always resonated with me and something that I've always thought about, and it's the fact that we're an archipelago, which means that we have students all across our islands, and sometimes they're disadvantaged from the opportunities simply because somebody cannot physically be present. Do you think that we have lagged in leveraging technology to bridge this gap and to connect our islands?
Yes, we have. If I were even to go back to the period back, I would say maybe mid 90s, early 2000, when Amazon became one of the innovators in terms of moving the bookstore from a brick and mortar concept to a bookstore without walls. And I feel that our country, the Bahamas, as a nation, would thrive more um, with a focus on digital learning, digital education, simply because our economic situation is not like a lot of these first world countries where they could supply every student sitting in a classroom perhaps with a device. Um, Many of our students were coming from backgrounds where they were introduced to using a computing device because they borrowed it from a brother, a sister, a cousin, a neighbor. And so I felt like this is a way that our country can improve itself. Have you ever noticed a country, well, certainly a first world country, where um, they thrive because they had illiterate people, or that they were just imparting all of their intellectual abilities? No, they recognized that education needed to be an important factor in the progress of their nation. And I felt like a small country like the Bahamas needs to focus on distance education, distance learning to bridge the gap. We do need students in all corners of our nation to be able to have access to a solid education. And it shouldn't matter whether they live in Inagua. It shouldn't matter if they live in Accolins. It shouldn't matter if they live in Exuma or San Salvador. They should have access to first-rate teaching, just like someone living in Nassau does, or Eleuthera, or Abaco, or Grand Bahama. And so I feel like technology, while it's not the answer for everything, if it ends up in the right hands, it can really improve our progress.
Thank you so much for that. Before we go further, I'd like for you to explain, because I know there are two words that are used interchangeably, and for some people they have the same meaning, a different meaning. But when we talk about virtual learning and online learning, explain the difference for us between those two modalities or those two terms, please.
Okay, so virtual learning is learning that has to happen with some form of communication or digital technology. Online learning, or online learning could be something that is facilitated outside of a computing device. So just like how we are here with this show, someone tuning in can listen from their device, and they're learning or they're interacting with the information that's coming across. So online learning, it's more expensive than virtual in a sense, because it can include telecommunications outside of the computer. So it can include the radio. It can include the telephone. It can include some other device other than a computer to expand or to improve or to facilitate learning.
So I want to get our students in on this. Jamaro and Shaquilla, what has been your experience? Share your experiences with our listeners with having to transition from being face-to-face to having to be in a remote learning environment.
I can say that it's been a wonderful experience. I would almost say God sent, believe it or not.
So for me, the online learning, the virtual learning has been a blessing. I was trying to figure out, because I'm a mature student, how I was going to do this. And so when this was announced, it was heaven sent. I rejoiced. And so I'm really enjoying it. I'd say too that, I don't know, for some reason I feel the lecturers, and this is strange, could be a little more engaged because of it. And I think it's because they've migrated to this form, and I think it requires a little more planning, a little more preparation. They have to use some different things to help get lessons across. And the technology that has been engaged with all of the virtual and online learning has just been phenomenal. So the last time I actually did classroom at UB, it was then COB. And It was interesting. It was okay. But I feel that this one has just been phenomenal. For example, I take a French class and I can um, listen to people speaking French over the online platforms and everything else. I think it's enhanced my learning just a bit.
You said a keyword, enhanced learning, and I wanna ask all of you. Um,
Like Jamarco, I'm also a mature student. So I've I've seen UB transition so much over the number of years, from the very long lines to pay a bill to being able to just press paid, to pay off your school fees. But this transition has really been a good one for me.
Dr. Darling, I asked the students, but what has been your experience having to transition from the face-to-face environment or where you would have seen your students in a classroom on UB's campus, whether in the Michael Eldon complex or in the Harry Seymour Library in one of their lecture classrooms? What has it been like having to move from that mode to virtual and remote learning?
Well, first of all, I think the most immediate impact that it had for me was the temporary ceasing of the classes, the physical classes, and the activity of face-to-face teaching. That was kind of a shock to me, even though I would say that it wasn't as forceful it wasn't as forceful for me as it was for other persons, because I always had some element of online learning included or integrated in my classes. But that was the first shock to me with COVID and its impact on my teaching. Then, second of all, I would say that it felt very strange to connect with students for the first time and not know what they look like. Usually when you're in a face-to-face setting, you could pick up some cues from people's body language. But and in the virtual environment, you don't have that. That is gone from the interaction. So that was another thing that felt strange to me. And then I think just being in this completely new situation, I had to readjust and figure out how could I make the class when, I could do so many things to make it engaging for students. If they saw me face to face, I could have some sort of icebreaker. Now, how do I transfer all of that to the online environment? And so I had to rethink how I would approach it. But I would say that COVID-19 was a huge disruptor to many of the functions that I carried out in the university and in the classroom environment. But I would say that it was a positive push in the right direction for me, because now I could clearly have students that were studying in Freeport, that were studying in Andros, that were studying in Abaco. I think this semester I have someone that's in Exuma. And one of the things that I found quite interesting about the experience was a couple of times, we would be having like a really fun session. We're talking and we're exchanging, and sometimes I'd hear a voice that I don't recognize. And so one time I said to the student, I'm just going to call her Jane for the sake of the show, but I said, Jane, it's coming from your mic, but it's not your voice. So she said, my mom background having more fun in my class than I am. And so I thought that it was quite interesting that with us moving the session online, it was something that persons outside of the classroom could enjoy. And her mom seemed to have been really engaged. She was answering the questions. I think she was having a good time, but she didn't like the fact that her family members were, engaging in the
participating
exchange.
In her class.
Yeah. Yeah, engaging in the exchange, and it was something that she wanted to just have as her own experience.
I totally understand. So I'm going to piggyback off of something Dr. Darling said. You said that COVID-19 was a huge disruptor, and for some it was good, and for others it was bad. As an educator, I'm sure there are some of your colleagues who did not have the same ease of transitioning as you did. And I know you mentioned that, you know, you had to really think about your classes and lesson plan, for lack of a better word, to make sure that it was engaging, because the dynamics were just different and you didn't want to lose your students. You couldn't have that same interaction or read body language the way you would in an in-person environment. um, a lot of times people think that the same thing they do in the in-person classroom they can do online. Would you suggest that? Can you take what you do in person and just transition it to online and it be successful and effective?
No, I couldn't. First of all, I had to take into consideration because I wasn't seeing everybody face to face. I needed to focus on people's learning styles. So that was one of the first bents that I took when I adjusted my content. So I didn't just take what I was doing face to face and shoved that in the direction of teaching online. What I had to do was be thoughtful about the different learning styles and how each learning style would benefit from what I was teaching in the online environment. Then one of the things I also had to consider was whether or not there was a digital divide. So one of the things I had to do was I would take like the first week or two of the class and really train persons how to use the technology. And so I had some students who would say, well, at this time, because I focused so much on, or I would visit the lab on campus, the only device I really have to connect to the class is a cell phone. And so I would say, well, okay, here's what. For these classes, if you only have a cell phone, you can participate because I only need to hear your voice. But when it came to activities that we were doing where they needed more, I made sure that, I gave them some lead time to say, well, okay, for this particular activity, everybody needs to be in front of a device. So if you have to borrow, if you have to drive somewhere, if that was possible, some persons said that they went to family members' homes so that they could get their work done. And so it really took some coordinating on my part to make sure that students got the most of their learning experience. And if someone was using a device other than what I wanted, I think I tried to adjust to see if I could give them some more time to get the work done. But I tried to do that by being fair to the others as well. And so I always made sure that if I gave someone some extra time to do something, that it wasn't impacting other students who made the sacrifice to do their work on time. I realized the lack of, there was a digital divide. I realized that other people were experiencing economic hardship. I realized that some people had lack of access to technology, and then some people just don't trust it. I had a student that just didn't feel comfortable, doing all of her work using, she preferred face to face, and so we had to find ways to actually work around to stop her from quitting schools. Now she made it through 2 semesters. I don't know what happened after she didn't have classes with me anymore, but it is a real challenge for some people. And so I have had to think about not just the content, but how the person was interacting with, these educational inequities, along with adjusting to technology. But I can tell you a real hit was the students learning to use it, because I've had some students who said that they had to train other faculty members. When I asked them, well, how did you learn how to use this? They said, well, my teacher taught us the first week of class. And so you know that you know something when you can teach it to someone else.
You've said a whole lot, and our students, Jamaro and Shaquilla, have been kind of quiet. Jamaro, did you encounter any challenges, or was it a seamless transition for you?
So for me, it was a seamless transition. I think I overthought things just before. I kind of like to be prepared and know, and so sometimes the information wasn't coming fast enough, and then I got it that everybody was transitioning at the same time. But for me, it was seamless. Again, it was something that I wanted for a while because I'm a mature student and I wanted to be able to get in school. And then there were difficulties with leaving work, fighting through traffic to get to a classroom, and then figuring out how to get food and everything else. And so the virtual learning was actually a blessing for me. And I know I'm blessed and fortunate in that I didn't have to worry about the devices or an internet connection or a place where I could be on my own to complete studies and everything else. So I didn't have those particular worries. So for me, it was definitely a seamless transition. It was something I wanted and something now that I have it, I quite enjoy. I don't know why I expected it to be much the same as it was in face-to-face learning, and it's not. I had my accounts lecturer. She actually employed she used some game um, via the internet, and every so often she'd like do like okay a pop quiz or some type challenge, and she'd just launch it, and you'd have to complete it. And I don't think that would have been the same if we were in a face-to-face environment. So I love some of the things that lecturers are now employing to help students. For me, it's easy and it's convenient to do it all like this. I'm to the point when people think this is a joke. I don't know if I'm ready to go back face to face. I think some of it, because I think you miss like the social interactions. And even those I try to have, and I try to have it with study groups and a few other things. So you can still get to know fellow students. I don't know if I know some of them if I see them face to face, but I think that's the biggest part of it, that social interaction that I'm missing. But the rest of it, totally enjoying.
Well, that's good to hear that you've embraced it. And just for the sake of our listeners, because you both mentioned that you are mature students. So we classify mature students as those students that are older because, of course, when you think of university, you tend to think of students coming right out of high school and matriculating into university. But University of the Bahamas is unique in that we do have a lot of working older adults that are at the institution. And so that's what they mean when they say mature. They're not considering others immature, but they are the older, typically working adults. Sometimes they have families. And so I just wanted to clarify that for the sake of our listening audience. And sometimes it can be challenging. And I know a lot of times, Dr. Darling, when I would do some of those presentations in your classes, we had to make sure that everybody would be able to arrive there on time because a lot of the classes that you teach attract the mature students, the ones that are by nature of the courses that you teach. And so, of course, a lot of them were fighting traffic to get on campus, not able to find parking when they get there. Something may come up. And now in this online environment and this remote environment, they don't have those challenges. The challenges are different, but they don't have those challenges. And you mentioned, and something stood out when you spoke about the fact that you had to take into consideration learning styles. And not just that, you had to determine what the digital divide was. We see where the Ministry of Education and a lot of schools and even UB had an initiative where they were providing technology and equipment for students that didn't have it. I mean, as simple as people not having Wi-Fi in their homes or access to data. That was a gap that UB was trying to bridge, and even our Ministry of Education. Is that something that we take for granted because so many people seem to have cell phones? Do we tend to typically think that everybody has access? And you mentioned that word equity. What are some of the challenges in that regard, Dr. Darling?
Well, I would start off by saying that everybody is not on the same economic realm, so to speak. And I remember when I was asked a question sometime back from a friend of mine who we were studying together in New Jersey, and they had mentioned something about the digital divide. And I said, and I remember thoughtfully saying to them that the digital divide for some people is not always technology per se, or the use of technology, because I said I was proficient in using computers, but I just couldn't afford to purchase a device. And so for me, I knew how to use it, but I would always have to borrow it from someone, visit a family member, use a lab. And so for me, part of my situation was a matter of economics. I had other responsibilities, and so therefore being able to own a computer was something that just was unaffordable for me. Now, I will tell you this. There were times when I've actually had to work 2 jobs to be able to purchase the devices and the instruments that I needed to engage in learning. And so that's why, I'm usually very sympathetic to students that suffer from these forms of inequities and insecurities, and simply no fault of theirs. It's just the economic situation that they find themselves in. And so I've even just this semester in teaching some students, they actually own devices, but their devices weren't compatible with an application that we were using. And so the first persons that reached out to me and said, hey, I have such and such a device, but it's not compatible with the work that we're doing. Can you help me? And immediately I was able to secure some devices for those persons, but I couldn't help everybody that needed a device. So let's say, if I helped 3, there may have been 5 persons. And so I had to encourage them to say, borrow it from someone else, or see if a family member could help. And so, when it comes to the digital divide, it's more than just not being able to use a device. It's more about the economics that's associated with it. And this lack of access is something that policymakers really need to pay attention to. I think we need more infrastructure. I think we need people to sponsor. So sometimes, it's a good thing to help someone with their tuition, but also think about those hidden costs or hidden things that a student needs to thrive beyond the tuition. And to me, when a student doesn't have to contend with figuring out how they're going to get the supplies or the accessories that they need to learn, then they could really focus on the important thing, which is learning and picking up the skills that they need to become a better and a more productive person in the workforce. And I know that I said a lot, but I also wanted to say something that I actually missed. And the thing is one of the reasons, and maybe I need to make this a call. So if you're listening and you're tuning in today and you know that you could help a student, and it may not be someone necessarily at the University of the Bahamas, but in your environment, look for a student that you could, that needs some assistance. And if you could render it, give that $100 or $500, whatever you can afford to help to make their educational experience a good one. And many of us don't have a clear idea of how long this COVID situation will last. And so therefore, whatever you can do to help, you may not be able to help 10 persons. If you can help one, that one will reach hundreds. Because someone helped me, I'm reaching many people. And so do what you can. And I know in university relations, we all know that, getting assistance is something that's important. Those of us who have should help those who don't have.
Absolutely. Thank you for that clarion call, Dr. Darling. And of course, the university had a campaign, and I don't want to divulge too much, but I think that initiative will be up and running again, because we recognize that a lot of our students still have technology needs, and we are doing our best to see how we can assist those students. Well, ladies and gents, that brings us to our first break here on University Drive. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Chapter One Bookstore is your back-to-school headquarters. We are proud to serve the students, faculty, and staff of the University of the Bahamas and the community at large. We are the premier choice for the purchase of university textbooks and supplies, and UB logo apparel, paraphernalia, and gifts. We also carry a wide variety of school supplies, learning aids, and leisure books. Visit our copy center throughout the semester for all of your printing, copying, and binding needs. Chapter One Bookstore is located on the ground floor of the Michael Eldon Complex. Shop with us on Monday through Friday between the hours of 8:30 a.m. and 1 p.m. Call us at 397-2650 or email us at chapter1@ub.edu.bs. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Chapter One Bookstore. See you soon!
Welcome back to University Drive. I'm your host, Nikki Bow, and if you're just joining us, my guests today are Dr. Antoinette Pinder-Darling and Jamarco Thompson and Shaquilla Carey. And we're talking about the digital revolution and learning in this COVID-19 era and the pandemic and how it has impacted and affected us all. And I'm sure we've all had an experience, whether positive or negative, both, about, you know, the online learning. And I think those that have suffered the most have been our primary school and high school students who really need that social interaction. And I think we tend to think that university students fare better in this regard, but it has impacted them as well. And Dr. Darling, you spoke about something earlier, and you mentioned how one of the things you were keen about was making sure that you taught your students how to use the technology. Jamaro and Shaquilla, were you comfortable with the technology that you had, or was that part of her class beneficial? And do a lot of professors just seem to have this default notion that you know how to use the technology that you've been presented with?
I can say for the most part, there's this idea that there's the computer, we'll give you the assignments, you just get the assignments out of the way. I can say for Miss Darling, my experience with her has been a little bit different from another two classes I've had. One teacher, she would just come in and give assignments, give a lecture, and you upload your assignment and call it a day.
Jamaro, how was that experience for you? Did you find that, I mean, and I know no two people are ever alike, so you can't expect two lecturers to be the same. But overall, what has been your experience with how lecturers approach this and their perception of students' ability to function in a virtual environment?
I've been fortunate to have some wonderful lecturers at UB. You know, I hear a lot of people sometimes, I hear some people complain about some lectures, and I haven't had any bad experience with any lecture that I've had so far. So I'm blessed in that regard. To Dr. Darling's point, I think that a lot of times some lecturers, they would just come in and they would figure you should know. And so let me just pick up and run with it. Like, this is not the first time we use Cengage, MindTap. But this is the first time a lecturer has taken the all of the time with it to make sure that we understood it. I was okay with Cengage. I am happy though that Dr. Darling brought in the experts to help us understand it even more, because I found out some things that I didn't know, like that it was mobile and that it could operate offline. So this was a blessing for me, and so I'm so happy that she took the time. And I'm one of those, I know that every lecture is different. So, and I think it comes with having been around before, that you know that everyone is different. So you don't expect the same thing. You just got to figure out who's who, how they operate, and how best to get what you need from them. But I think that's another part of why that social element is so important, because those who are just around for the first time, they need some others to help guide them. And I think that social interaction takes a little longer to happen with all of this COVID stuff.
Jamaro, if I may add, it's so interesting because the teachers, not even the lecturers, not everybody's on the same page with technology. I have a particular professor who it's clear that she is not as versatile with technology as other persons are. And to tell you the truth, that is a bit of a challenge. Coming into this is a new semester for me, my first virtual semester, very different from my last stint with the university. But it's different for everybody, not only the students, but the professors. Like I said, you have some who are very versed and others who are not. And that kind of creates some, for me, who's just finding my footing, loving loving this new, I guess, this new way, or this new,
the new normal. The new normal.
Yes.
I'm loving this, but there's still a bit of changing gears. Example, with one professor, she doesn't record her classes. So, and like I said, she's not as versed, as knowledgeable, as open, even to recording the sessions to make it easier for the students. While there's in another class, I love it. There's a particular doctor, an accounting class. I love his class. We would record it in Teams. The classes are, when it's done, you can always go back and look at it. It's a useful tool, not only in the moment that you're there, but you have something to refer to. And in Miss Darling's class, it's a little bit different because it is a computer class, but it's engaging in another type of way.
So I heard all of you say something, and I think a common thing is, I guess, there are some people that take the initiative, and I guess that's with anything. Some people embrace technology, and some people are just terrified of it. Like my mom is terrified of technology, but she's a senior citizen, so I kind of expect that, and I try my best to navigate her through this new time that we find ourselves in, because we think that this digital revolution is almost exclusive to learning, but I've now had to teach her how to do online banking, because senior citizens like to go and stand on those bank lines and be in the bank.
They love it.
That's
love it for them.
Yes, and then even
and it's not so easy.
With NIB and paying her bills online and all of these things, and we've had to navigate her through this new normal. And then there are teachers who have never embraced technology. They've been that chalk and talk. They want that chalkboard, that whiteboard. They just want that model. And it's been difficult for them to adjust. And then there are students who like that model as well, and they've not been able to adjust. But I think it's also about familiarizing yourselves with the resources. You mentioned something, Jamaro, and I didn't get the name of it, but you said that you didn't know it could operate offline. And the moment you found that out, that was like a breath of fresh air, so to speak. Do you think, all of you, that both teachers and students are familiarizing themselves with the tools available and troubleshooting to make the best of the experience?
In my experience, COVID-19 has forced us to, all right? So I hope I don't get in trouble by saying this. I'm almost of the belief that if COVID-19 didn't happen, I don't know if the advances we've seen in the last year and a half with UB would have happened in terms of people engaging people in this way, all right? Because I still think there was a bit of resistance to it, even though quite a few of us wanted it before. So I think COVID-19 has forced us to. If you want to make sure your students succeed, then you have no choice but to. I see, like I told you, my accounts class and a few others, I'm finding other technologies to make sure that students are engaged and succeed. So that's a good thing there. And I think students are finding ways too, because listen, we at UB, we're very concerned about our grades. And so we're finding ways to make sure that we adapt, because right now you have no choice.
That's true. And can I add, if the university had not been thrust into this, I don't think I would have been here this semester. This online platform has allowed me the opportunity to be a parent of two wonderful sons, to be a working woman, and to also be a student, and to better be able to manage my time in accomplishing my goals. So I'm really excited to see what the future holds, and I'm really hoping that the university continues this modality. And I know their students are going to be coming on campus soon, but I can almost assure you, you'd retain and attract more students if this is something that continues.
Awesome. And if I might just add, as an educator,
certainly,
I think there's about three things I think are important. I think it's important as an educator for many of us to stay relevant and work with teaching. We have to stay current and teach with the technology. Long before persons were using Zoom and other things, I had these integrated in my classes. So I was not afraid to take risk. And I've always been bold in my thinking. And I think that's one of the things that attracts students to my classes. Because one, they see the benefits. I show up on time, which makes me predictable. I'm always prepared, so I anticipate the kinds of questions that they might ask. And when I discover that I cannot ask or answer a question that's posed to me, I go and I grab the expert. So the students were using a new application. They were asking me questions that I couldn't answer, but I knew that there were experts who could. And so I arranged a meeting and listened. It was wonderful. The students got what they needed. They're doing their work. And so for me, that helps me to facilitate change. So the students know that they're going to progress in my class because they were given everything that they needed to thrive.
You know, that is so true. All of you made very valid points. And I know I have a niece who I've been haggling to get back into UB, but she works and she's like, man, Auntie Nikki, I can't dash from work back to class and all these things. And for her, this has been a welcome change because now she's been able to return to UB, and being able to do classes online works for her, because even if she has to take her lunch hour to go and sit in her car to do a class, that's a flexibility that she didn't have before. And so there are so many benefits to this. And like you said, we were all thrust into this. And Jamaro, you said it, you know, that even though there was a bit of resistance, COVID-19 forced us, not just UB, but I think our entire country and the entire world, but more so our country where we were lagging in certain areas, it forced us to embrace technology and to see how we can leverage technology for our benefit. And for me, I'm just hoping that there are options that remain available and that we consider all of the possibilities when we think about it. Because like someone said, some students will prefer to remain in this remote environment, and others will prefer to go back into the classroom and be on campus. And if we could marry the two, I think we'd have the best of both worlds where it appeals to everybody. And we see how, and I guess for me, I know that technology is the way of the future. And when I think of the university's value proposition, which is preparing students for a better life in a global society, I think part of that preparation for the global society is going to be the proficiency of technology, being proficient, knowing how to use different applications, not being afraid, like Dr. Darling said, of taking risks and exploring things and figuring it out as you go along, and not being afraid of technology. Dr. Darling, with that
but just
said,
before you move on that point, I just wanted to I wanted to add that many persons think that the way of thinking about what were the basic skills that people needed to thrive. Remember, maybe during your parents' age, it was the ability to read, write, and do arithmetic. Mm-hmm. Well, in this current modern age or digital age, most persons need to have other literacy. and digital literacy is topping the list. But I must add that we cannot run away from some of the other important factors as well. The other soft skills like critical thinking, being able to communicate, having emotional intelligence. Those things are just as important as having the technology skills, because as we can tell, there are some very smart people that do some unethical things.
Great. So what I wanted to get in real quick was that we have to find a way, and I wish I knew, and if somebody who does know, to look at the enrollment at UB and other institutions that have gone like totally virtual and online, and see if there aren't a lot more people who are going back back to school. I know my nephew, he even went, two of them, and I don't think they would have done it otherwise. BTVI, they enrolled now because you can do it
On
virtually online, right? And so I think that has helped. And if we really want to see it shift to more people seeking post-secondary education, we really need to consider keeping this and finding more ways to engage people who are like me, who have to work but worried about how I'm going to get to and fro and whether or not I'm going to miss a class here and there.
Well, I can tell you. Go ahead, Shaquilla, you wanted to add something?
And I was saying, as adults, sometimes life just happens. And to tell you the truth, there's the convenience of being able to have your phone, being in a class that's being recorded, where you're present at that moment in class, and still being able to handle life as it happens. The convenience is just a wonderful feature.
I understand. Well, tomorrow, to answer or to address the question posed as to whether, you know, the data has been gathered or, you know, anybody has done research, I can tell you hands down that enrollment at UB increased when we transitioned to online. And I can also tell you positively that a lot of the faculty members that were resistant to teaching online courses, because this is something that we've been, you know, advocating for a long time, now they don't want to go back to face-to-face. So this has provided an amazing opportunity for the university, because it also means that we're not limited to course offerings to just Bahamians. So as we expand access for higher education, it also means that we get to attract people from all corners of the globe to be students at University of the Bahamas, because they don't have to physically be in the Bahamas to be a student at the institution. Or
and to prepare for lecturers, I guess, as well, too, because I had a lecturer who was not in the Bahamas, but taught from where he was.
Yes, and so it is providing tons of opportunities, and it's just a matter of positioning ourselves to seize those opportunities and to take advantage of them when they present themselves, and to figure out how we can strike that balance. Because of course there are some people that are dying to be back in person, and then there are those who just love it. And I'll be honest, I work from home, and look at how technology is allowing us, where, you know, we're all in different locations, but we're together and we're connected through technology, and we're able to record this show without putting anyone's health at risk and not, you know, the unknowns. And so we have to figure out how best to leverage the technology that we have and to see the good in all things. And you made very good points about how this works for you and how enrollment has increased. And I think it is only going to get better from here, because we are going to have no other choice but to do those things that Dr. Darling mentioned. We have to remain relevant and we have to remain current. And as a national tertiary institution, we have an obligation to remain relevant and to remain current, because it is our job and our duty to positively contribute to the growth and development of our country. And so it's just amazing. What are some of the other things that you're looking forward to as students of UB, and how, in comparing some of your experiences prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and Shaquilla, you mentioned it earlier, you know, the technology has, and our transition to more digital platforms, not just in the classroom, but even when you think about the online process and banner and being able to make payments online and being able to request a transcript online. The ease of doing business at UB, has that improved? And speak about your experience in that regard.
In some areas it has, and in others, not so much. I found, fine, you can make a payment, you can query your bill, you can request a transcript. There are some things where it's just, as long as you can make an online payment, you're good. But I found over the past couple of weeks, in fact, not the past couple of weeks, the past few months, just the response times from certain offices. I know that the university has a hybrid model right now with persons being in and out of office. I think we can work on our communication a little bit better. I think that it does hinder some students. You know, I'm one of those who's extremely aggressive. I'm going to call, I'm going to email, I'm going to call the office next to you and after that, you know, but for some, it can be a real challenge with communication. So in some areas, there's, I mean, leaps and bounds, just good stuff. And in others, like communication, I think that's a big deal, a big challenge that we can meet and improve on.
Well, we are aware of that, and that's something we are working on. And you know, no two offices at UB are the same, but it's something that we've recognized. And again, it was a learning curve for us. Not that I'm making excuses, but we are doing our best, and that's something. Response time and responsiveness is something that we are aware of, and each head is working with their respective departments to improve that. So hopefully we catch up in that regard as well, if I could say something positive. And you know, when we find ourselves in these kinds of situations, there are always opportunities for improvement. And I think that's something that we're also learning in the classroom, outside of the classroom. There is always room for improvement, and sometimes we have to buck our toe in order to figure out how do we do this, because sometimes it's things that we don't typically think about. So Damaro and Shaquilla, before we go, I want to talk a little bit more, because we jumped right into this conversation and we didn't find out what your majors are, how long you've been at UB, and what your career goals are. So share that with us, please, before we wrap up this show.
I am a returning student in the process of transitioning from a science to a business area.
My major is human resource management. So the first time, it was COB then, when I was there, my major was psychology. I have had the opportunity to work in human resource, I still do, and I absolutely love it. So my career goals are kind of along that line there. Consultancy, building corporate culture, organizational development. That's what I want to do. And I haven't been back to UB very long. It has been almost 1 solid year since I got back to UB.
Well, it's good to know that, you know, we have people who start and who come back home, and it's always good to welcome you. And I'm sure we're going to be celebrating 5 years as a university. And that's a big deal. And I'm sure you can both see where the institution has made strides and made improvements, and things are changing. And I'm hoping, and I'm optimistic that things will only continue to get better. Dr. Darling.
I'm going to say something. You mind?
Sure.
I'm going to say something that, I mean, may sound a little strange, right? The first time I was at COB, it was okay. All right. And I don't know if I was looking forward or really excited to be back, but I am absolutely thrilled that I'm back, and I am loving UB. I am selling UB, as a matter of fact, how much I love it. And so that is where I'm at this moment in time.
Well, look at there. I love that. You are a UB ambassador, an official
Exactly.
UB ambassador.
Yes.
Awesome. Those are the types of stories that we love to hear.
And I just wanted to say that I'm happy to hear this positive feedback from students, because impact of COVID has been one that has been tremendous. Like I said, it was a disruptor, but we love to hear that there are positive outcomes coming out of it. And I was I was tuning in intently when you were talking about the statistics. I have to get some in of my own. The research says that the best model of learning is the hybrid. So it is a combination of face-to-face and online learning. So I believe that that's perhaps the model that the university probably may need to embrace going forward so that we could actually keep appealing to both types of learning.
Well, Dr. Darling, I'm going to allow you to have the last word. And as we wrap up this show, I want you to give advice to three different groupings. First, to educators, your fellow educators, and for those who may struggle operating in this virtual environment. Then to students, and to those again who may struggle, and to parents, because we have a lot of people who listen to the show that don't have students at UB. They have younger children, but they're also trying to figure out how they can help their young children cope and thrive in this online environment. So if you may, please give us some nuggets and tips for those three groupings: your fellow educators, your UB students, and then parents of younger students.
I will start with my UB educators. My first advice to you is make sure that you focus on being a good educator. And by doing that, you need to make sure that you impact the lives of the people that you're teaching, and in a positive way. Make sure that students see the benefits of taking a class with you. Make sure that they see that you're invested in making sure that they develop not just as a student, but as a democratic citizen, as a future employee who will contribute to the economic development of the country. And then third of all, make learning attractive. Most of us do things. Most of us date certain people because we find them attractive. Most of us visit certain places because we find it attractive. Well, learning must have the same appeal. We must attract people. When they're attracted to what we're doing, then the interest builds. And in doing that, I feel like students will have a wonderful experience. And I think my final advice would be to be emotionally intelligent. And when I say that, that doesn't mean that we're just focusing on making sure that people just feel good, or that, we're just meeting a need. What emotional intelligence means is that you look at something from the perspective of the person. And so, if you're saying something, make sure that that's something that the person wants to hear. And I'm not talking about being manipulative or deceptive, but making sure that there's value that you're imparting, because what you're doing is going to benefit the students. Now, what is my advice for students? I believe in the rule of three. And this is something that I would say that I'm taking from Steve Jobs. I've always followed him as a thought leader, and he always said that he focuses on three things whenever he's doing something. And I believe that as a student, focus on three things as a learner. Focus on what is it that you want to accomplish. Focus on why it will make you successful, because I find that a lot of people do things, but they do it and not because they really want to do it. They do it because they want to follow somebody else that's doing it. Know why you're doing something. Simon Sinek says the most important word in our vocabulary should be why. Always question why you're doing something, and then focus on a future that you envision. Don't study because it will please your parents. Don't study because it will please your spouse. Study something because you really want to make a difference in the world. Miles Monroe once said, what we do from 9 to 5 puts profit into someone else's pocket. Well, guess what? Focus on what you do from 5 to 9 and put profit into your pocket. Focus on those things that will improve you for the better. And if I may offer advice to families, and so there may be those of you that are sitting at home and you are invested in making sure that you support your children. And part of that is just being there and showing concern. I know most of the children probably like the fact that they don't have to be in the classroom, but don't let them be out gallivanting all day in the yard. Make sure that they have chores to do. Make sure that you encourage them to do some reading. Do activities with them and make it fun. I know one time, someone had said to me, when their son didn't want to go to kindergarten. He and his wife, they dressed up and they started playing and doing all sorts of fun things, and the child wanted to participate, and they said, no, you can't participate, you don't want to go to kindergarten. So these are the things that they do in kindergarten. Well, guess what? That child loved kindergarten, and that child loved school up to the point of graduating from university. So just because you're a parent doesn't mean that you could take a backseat approach to your child's education. Do the things to help to support them. And I know that this is a terrible time for some people. Some people may have had to quit their jobs, or you may have had to take your children out of private school. But guess what? As a parent, just try to make sure that your child doesn't fall too far behind. And to me, I think what I would say is build a relationship with the teacher. Find out, show concern for what your child is learning. And I know that not all families had the same economic resources during COVID, but I think one of the things that the Bahamas has done well in its past is we're wonderful as a community. So if you don't feel as though you could you have what it takes to help your child, find a family member who can. Most people want to help. And so my advice to you is to make sure that you don't allow your child to fall behind. And like I said, if you find that there's some deficiency, look for a family member, look for a friend, even ask the teacher if they can offer more assistance, but do not let your child fall behind. And education is not a gift. It's not just even a benefit, it's a right.
Dr. Darling, thank you so very much for that. Those were very good nuggets that you gave. From the educators, the one thing that stood out was focus on being a good educator, make learning attractive, and emotional intelligence. And then the 3 rules to students. What do you want to accomplish? Why it will make you successful? And focus on the future you envision. And then families, if I could sum it all up, you just, be an engaged parent and do not allow your children to fall behind. And I wish you both all the best on your education journey here at University of the Bahamas. Thank you, Dr. Darling. Thank you both for being guests on Season 8, first episode. I'm so excited, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
That brings us to the end of this episode. Be sure to join us next week, same time, same radio station, for another exciting episode of University Drive. And be sure to connect with us on our website at www.ub.edu.bs, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find an archive of all of the University Drive shows. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I'm Nikki Bo. Enjoy the remainder of your day.
University Drive is a production of the Office of University Relations and the Communications and Creative Arts Academic Unit at University of the Bahamas. All rights reserved.